Because when you do a noble thing, it needs to be seen. When you do a noble thing, a community needs to be there and say, wow, that's great. And I will tell you from my own personal experience, because I've raised 4 kids, 3 boys, which is hard as hell, and a beautiful daughter, and of course, I have 4 grandkids. And I would say that I made every mistake you can make as a father. I'm the first one to admit it, because I have to. Because if you're not going to admit your mistakes, you don't need me up here. You think I'm up here because I did everything right? No, I'm up here because I did a lot of things wrong. But I learned a few things. I was not a good father to my oldest kids. This is something that I will always regret for the rest of my life. And if anybody says that they don't have regrets, they haven't lived. People say, I got no regrets. Okay, you haven't lived, man, or you're lying. You have to have some regrets. And I have a lot of them. And one of them is that I was not a father to my kids. This was wrong on my part. It was a pain that I will always carry. But what's worse is what happened to those kids. My 2 oldest kids suffered for not having a decent father in their life. And I began to realize how important it was. My dad wasn't there for me, but I didn't know. I didn't know that I was going to be like my dad. You know how much I hated my dad? And then I ended up just like him. And you know what? They have paid a big price. And as some of you already know, my oldest son, and I have to talk about him almost everywhere I speak because he's still with me. I'm somebody that I will always think about, and because I'm always in touch with him, he's somebody that I always got to think about what we're going to do. He's now serving 28 years in prison for 3 counts of attempted murder. And nobody really wants their kids. Whatever I did as a gang member, whatever I did as a drug addict, whatever I went through, I never wanted my kids to go through this. And a part of him, unfortunately, even though I tried to keep this away from him, was trying to be like me. Can you imagine that? How come he couldn't be like a writer-poet? No, he wanted to be like this idea that he had, this ideal of a gangster that he thought I was. You know, and the sad thing about it is that it was me. I can't pretend it wasn't. I didn't know how to put it together. I was trying to deny that life. I was trying to say I didn't talk about it. I should have talked about it. Because, you know, I didn't talk about it, he idealized it. I have all these tattoos. I can't hide from these tattoos. They're there. I'm not going to get rid of them. I'm too old for that. But the point is they're there, you know. And the thing is, he sees that and he says, that's what I want. I want this life. Whatever that idea was. And I wouldn't talk about it. I should have talked to him about it. This is why I did finally write Always Running. To talk about these things that nobody wants to talk about. And you know that Always Running, there are several generations of gang members in parts of LA. Some of them go back to the 1920s. I used to know in my neighborhood grandmothers chasing their kids down the street with tattoos on their arms. Old pachucas from the old days. And you know what? Mothers who lost 2 or 3 sons. People who lost a lot of people in the gang warfare since that time. Tens of thousands of kids died, gone. And you know what? Nobody's ever written about it. Nobody had written about the LA Chicano gang experience until Always Running came out. That's a shame. It took that long for somebody to do it. And of course, as soon as I did it, I got my butt kicked. You know, I mean, anybody writing about this stuff is going to get their butt kicked. That's part of what it takes. It's a big risk to tell your story. It's a huge risk to tell your story. But it was worth it. And I had to make a decision to publish this book or not. And I was almost at the decision where I wanted to do it. Because I said, okay, I wrote the story. It was great therapy for me to write this. I didn't realize how healing it was for opening up all this stuff. I could have just dropped it at that. But you know what? Somebody has to take that risk to put these stories out here. Because it turned out that once the book came out, people began to relate to it for what it said, the stories that it told. And not just Chicanos, not just other Latinos. I saw it in white kids, even poor white kids, African Americans, Asian kids. I go all over the country and people are reading the book and they're relating to it. The story of a lost young person. Whose story is that? It's probably everyone here. A young person who isn't embraced by family, isn't embraced by community, isn't embraced by schools. That's a lot of people. And so the story began to resonate only because it told that story and somebody had to take a risk. You know, when the book came out, my former rival gang members put a contract on my head. My own family, well, they had already disowned me, so it didn't really matter, but they triply disowned me after the book came out. I mean, I had families in my neighborhood and in other neighborhoods that would never talk to me. That a lot of people were pissed off. And I still had to push this book through because the healing power of telling one story was so important that I needed to do it despite the risk. And I remember getting a call from somebody in prison because I was dealing with prisoners for many, many years, and I'd visited a lot of prisoners. I got a call from one of my homies who wanted to put a stop to it, but to me, that meant he was going to hurt somebody. And I told him, don't deal with it. Don't touch it. I don't want nobody hurt because of this book. I don't want nobody talk to it. Just leave it alone. Leave it alone. You know how you can start fires like that, little sparks here and there? So I don't want nobody hurt by this book. If somebody's going to come after me, let him come. Because if I'm going to take this risk, then I'm going to go all the way with it. And if I'm going to fight for peace, and I'm going to fight for our communities, and I'm going to fight for our families, I'd rather die for that than what I was willing to die for nothing when I was a kid. If that's what it takes, I will do that. Now, I'm not stupid. I'm not going to invite people to hurt me. I'm not going to invite anybody to hurt my family. But I think the thing is you have to have a level of dignity that says, I need to put this out and I will take the risks involved. And I've gone back to the prisons where supposedly somebody had a contract. I talked to these guys. I call them young men. I'm sorry. They're probably not that young, but I'm at the age where now almost everybody is young to me, you know. So, and you know what? And they were fine with me. And I remember that I went to San Quentin one time and I did a big poetry reading in the maximum security yard. Because, you know, San Quentin has no place for anybody to do these things because every one of their places is taken over and so overcrowded. You know, they don't got no more place. Only the chapel is probably the only place they could still have things happening. So they had us in the maximum security yard. And Metallica had played there like a month before. And I'm supposed to compete with Metallica, you know, because they had me with a mic and I'm supposed to read poetry and hopefully some people pay attention. So, but I did it. I went and did it. And you know what? I was surprised how many people, it wasn't just me. It was several other poets, and there was some people with some drumming, and there was a saxophone player, and we tried to get some people interested. We had a lot of people there. And then one guy comes up to me, and he says, you know what? All those other guys that are picking weights and playing basketball, and guess what? They're listening to you, man. Don't worry about it. They're all listening to you. So we had a really good audience. But at one point, I saw a guy I hadn't seen in 30 years. One of my homies from 30 years ago, doing a life sentence since then. And he comes up with my book. And he, you know, I hadn't seen him, big homie, been through whatever he's been through. I could tell, I could see his face, I could still see some of it, but he was really different. He was just, you know, I hadn't seen him in 30 years. He comes out with my book, and I don't know what he's thinking, and I really don't care. Because again, I know why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm not trying to hurt nobody. I'm not trying to get nobody in trouble. I'm just trying to tell my story. By the way, I changed people's names because I wasn't to protect not just the innocent but the guilty. I was protecting everybody, including the guilty. So I wasn't going to rat on nobody. It was just a matter of me telling the story. So anyway, but what happens, the guy comes up to me and then he says, you know what, after we talked for a while, he was glad to see me, but I didn't know what he was thinking. Finally, you know, he says, whatever you do, help the kids. And you know why? Because he couldn't help him anymore. And maybe whatever he was doing, he didn't believe anymore. It didn't matter. He was caught in that web. He could not pull himself out of that web. The web that, you know, people put in the prisons, the tattoos, when they're coming out. You know what that web is? The web of the crazy life. La vida loca that holds you. And you know what? You're not a fly in the web. You're a spider in it. You yourself are pulling yourself deeper and deeper in that web. Your own pathologies, your own pains, your own traumas, deeper and deeper. And this is why it's harder to unravel from it, because you yourself are a participant in that. And that he was caught in that web. And he knew that he couldn't help nobody, but he says, you help the kids. Well, I think we have to help these young men unravel themselves from that web. And the idea isn't to just pull them out of a web and let them loose out there. The idea is to find another web that will hold them, that will teach them, that will guide them, and will let them express their true nobility, their true dignity, and their true passions in art.